and the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Consortium before joining us as a postdoctoral fellow. And I would like to welcome Dr. Little today, and I will turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fink. Appreciate that intro. I'm very, very excited to be here talking to you all about this. This has elements of my dissertation in it, but also what this is kind of an accumulation of my experiences I've garnered throughout my training and throughout my schooling. And this is me kind of tying together those pieces that I feel are most important to the substance use community narrative. So there are elements of my dissertation in here, and then kind of a 30,000 flyover view about kind of my ideas and how these all interconnect. So let's get started, because I have a tendency to be a bit long-winded, so I don't, I'm trying to build that into the presentation so I can give you guys back some time at the end or for questions if needed. So let's get moving. So, So some of the objectives you may have read before, but what I want to talk about is widening our awareness of addiction services and how they impact community systems. I'd like us to go over the role stigma and culture plays in treatment and help seeking in general. There's also a little more to that. We'll kind of dive into other roles, not just stigma and culture, but other facets that influence and have a meaningful impact, negative or positive, in certain communities. I want to synthesize and understand how addiction treatment and the correctional system mutually impact one another. Some people think that it's fed in one direction, and in reality, they mutually impact one another. I want to also lead discussions about how we're going to actually integrate some of these ideas into our line of work. So this is a little bit of an irregular presentation, probably one you're not quite familiar with. So I guess just stay buckled in and keep your hands in, and we'll just take you for a ride here. So let's get started. Let's zoom out 30,000 feet. How big a problem are we talking here? So when I'm talking problem, I'm talking problematic substance use and its impact. So just off of the rip, problematic substance use and alcohol use continue to be a substantial public health and safety problem, but that is not exclusive to just the United States. This is a global issue. It is the 5th leading contributor to global burden. I believe it's taking over as the 4th. In the US alone, approximately 2 million people are seeking treatment in 2017 for a a problematic substance use related episode. And that was in 2017. That was pre-COVID. So think about now, this already fractured, fragile, strained healthcare system, and what that might look like now, probably not looking good. But this is a ballooning trend that is trending this way, up, 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 up. And it hasn't really shown a lot of reprieve, a little dips here and there, but it's largely continuing to be a growing issue. So why does it continue to be a growing issue year over year? Any guesses? This is, again, kind of a more active presentation. So any guesses? I also have the chat open if anybody wants to type in any guesses of what ideas they have as to why this becomes a continually global trend. Any ideas? And I have the answer on the next slide. I have my ideas on the next slide. Why is this substance use community why is the problem spreading more prolifically year after year? Any ideas? Great, I'll tell you all the ideas then. That's okay. Excellent. Yes, healthcare, finances, the economy, absolutely. Excellent. Yeah, and so here's some of my ideas in lieu of and in congruency with that. So why do well, it's kind of like a pick your choice, right? There's like you were saying, like healthcare availability of healthcare, finances, the economy. I also think about the American attitude that we have around college-aged people's binge drinking. It's kind of almost like they're given a pass. It's like almost an understood thing. Oh, you're 18 or you're 20, you just turned 21. I bet you're going to get, trashed tonight, or however the culture kind of goes. There's also a multi-billion-dollar marijuana and alcohol industry that is kind of tough to ignore. They are pretty influential, and I'm not saying that's why it's becoming more and more problematic, but they're a profitable industry, and with profit comes some power and influence. And that kind of draws me into my next line. The predatory pharmaceutical industry is absolutely got their hand in the cookie jar on this one. I'm looking at you, Sackler family, absolutely destroying our communities with their salesman-like pushing and their lack of trustworthy information they were given to doctors, and how they pushed these pharmaceuticals on the community itself. The having pain be the fifth vital sign and all this nonsense. They absolutely have a role in this. Media portrayals, how it's glorified through movies, television, music, readings. I mean, it's just a part of our culture. Lobbyists and lawmakers obviously have a big role in this, and many times how they're punished, how they're categorized, and sometimes, and that's not true, all the time, these lobbyists and lawmakers will categorize substances not necessarily on their risk profile, but on power and politics, and more on that later. Alcohol and substances also have a multi-purpose use in our culture. We celebrate it with weddings, we mourn it with funerals, celebration with graduations, holidays, family and friends get-togethers, parties. It's kind of hard to escape. So now we need to think through, what is the cost of all of this? So if it's a global problem and an American problem, American and global problem, and it's continually getting worse, what is it costing us? So let's reference some of our most prolific and respected finance literature researchers. Let's see what we have to say in 2023. What does the research show us? Well, McDuck in 2023, it's going to cost us a lot of money here. Obviously, this is an incredible cost. Obviously, McDuck is fake. I don't know if you got your Scrooge McDuck figured out, but this just picture felt like it completely embodied how much this is actually costing us. So let's look into the details. So the Office of National Drug Control Policy, they report spending $21.7 billion in 2007, increasing to 30.6 in 2016, 14.7 billion dollars specifically for treatment and prevention. That would be where we come in, right? Another interesting article by Fairman et al. In 2018 examined a 6-year average Medicare cost, like healthcare utilization for people with and without substance use disorders. This should surprise nobody, but if we look at these stats, $42,500 for somebody without a substance use disorder, as far as their cost on average within that 6-year span for Medicare. Somebody with a substance use disorder more than doubles, almost $100,000 a year in healthcare costs. So man, if you really think about how much McDuck is diving into his golden coins here, man, it's costing us a lot of money. But when you think about this data is from 2017. So this is absolutely worse than this. And this was before COVID. So think about what happens after COVID, how strained it was and how much damage that COVID absolutely did to this healthcare system. Tremendous, right? But we're thinking a little too narrowly, I think. So when we're thinking of this problem, this substance use problem, this isn't just healthcare utilization and money. It costs the community a lot more than that. And here's where I kind of want to break down a little further what other costs are incurred, not just the financial ones, but the other things that the community has to shoulder. So let's talk about that. So what else does this impact? Problematic substance use contributes to this quote unquote overheating of the judicial system. That's about as nice a way as I can put that. When I am referring to overheating, I'm referring to over policing, over crackdowns, and the judicial system being clogged up by all of these substance related issues. What happens is it just makes everything less available for everyone else in the judicial system who need to have their day in court. This judicial system is tied up with managing what I call the quote unquote byproducts of addiction. And those are damaged mental health, damaged physical health, and damaged spiritual health. And that might sound a little cheesy, but I can't tell you how many times I've had a client talk to me about how this impacted their faith and how they were thinking, and they were saying to me, quote, loose quote, paraphrasing, why would my God let this happen to me? I've been a good Christian, or I've been a good Muslim, or I've been a good Buddhist or Taoist, or and it feels like my religion's turning their back on me because of the suffering that I've been going through. I'm almost kind of doubting that my God loves me anymore. That's absolutely, it affects their spiritual health. It also, people who are dealing with problematic substance use are exposed or are experiencing increased violence, experiencing homelessness, financial ruin, sometimes committing crimes in the name of their addiction to help feed their addiction. There's a lot of loss of trust in the community. We're straining and breaking the family unit and the family structure. More on that later about isolation and punishment. So this is where I would love for somebody to type in here, and it should be about as softball as an answer as it gets. Question: which communities are most disproportionately negatively impacted by this judicial overheating? And you could type it out or unmute and just fire away. That's fine too. Yep, 100%. Yep, yep, yep. That's exactly right. It's communities of color that are most disproportionately negatively impacted. And when people try to refute that, it's easy to go back into just a trove of science and research and literature. But I mean, just think through, generally speaking, we can even go back to the 80s and 90s thinking about powdered versus cracked cocaine. Chemically speaking, they're almost identical, but if you were caught with powdered cocaine and were white, you would get a sentence that would be, I don't know, if you got sentenced at all, it would be, I don't know, maybe a third the time or a third the punishment, or I'm being conservative. But if you were a person of color with a crack rock, which was almost identically chemically similar to the powder, you got the book thrown at you. And so it's like, oh, this overheating could be over policing on communities of color, which really helps damage our community's trust in general. Anyway, moving on, we're going to do some more deeper dives into this as we go, but just keep that in mind as we're moving through this and how this all kind of ties back into itself. So, oh, we're lagging. There we go. But what about the judicial system? We were talking about how this overheated judicial system kind of negatively impacts the community, but how does this judicial system kind of feed back into the substance use community? Well, I think the first and easiest place to go to for me would be go back to the recidivism rates. So think about this. People on average after 2 years have a national average, a rearrest rate of 71%. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get my laser pointer and do this. 71% rearrest rate. Now, that doesn't mean that they're reincarcerated and necessarily back into the pipeline. However, that would be a national average of high 40 percentiles, low 50 percentiles. Now, if I were a math teacher, and think of it this way, I'm a math teacher at let's say an elementary school, and I'm teaching basic arithmetic, and I had 49% of my students need to retake that math class. That would mean I, number one, don't know how to teach math. Number two, don't know how to teach at all. Number three, I would be out of that job by lunchtime if I had rates that were that horrific. But because this is the only system that we really have, it kind of gets a pseudo pass. So anyway, I'll get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to tell you a quick story about my experience in Nebraska corrections, because I spent a lot of time there and I got kind of a peek behind the curtain, which gives me the confidence to talk about this the way I am. 71%, right? Okay, so I partner with a nonprofit organization that does a lot of restorative justice. And this restorative justice program was created by somebody who was incarcerated in the 90s. He was doing some running and gunning, he did a bunch of stick-ups in the Nebraska, I won't get into the details, in Nebraska, did a bunch of stick-ups and served 8.5 years for armed robbery. In those 8.5 years, he built a program of how to keep people out, keeping his family out. And then he refined that program over time and brought people in and had academics come and kick the tires of his program. And as I was jumping on, I ended up really immersing myself in the material and teaching people who were incarcerated on probation, who were paroled, or who were on death row. I had an opportunity to go and teach these classes. we collected data since, well, not me, but the program collected data since 2002, and they did a study on how their recidivism rates were compared to their Nebraska average. Nebraska average at that time, when they published that paper 2 years ago, was about 52% recidivism rate, as far as within 3 years being reincarcerated back into that system. The nonprofit organizations recidivism rate when I was there and after they published that paper was 16%. So it went substantially lower. And now we're starting to get the attention of local lawmakers, because if everyone ignores all of the work we do, that's whatever, I can't help that. But if they see the money that we can save, now all of a sudden we got people's attention. And Nebraska spends on average $320 to $339 million annually on their 10 correctional facilities. If you think of the recidivism rate being cut down to 16%, I mean, the taxpayer dollars saved, you could have gold bricks basically paved over on every street if we wanted to. I'm being dramatic, but you get the point. Anyway, and that program was a 1 8-hour class talking about emotional hygiene and, you know, elements of how to act and how not to act and impulse control. And we'll get to those details a little later, but it was effective. And we started to raise eyebrows because we were saving money, and that's a way for us to get attention, right? But the recidivism rate, nationally speaking, is an embarrassment. And I think that this system doesn't function how it's supposed to. And why I'm thinking of a correctional system and what it's supposed to do, my thought was it's to reintegrate people back into the community. But that's not what the system's designed to do. The system is designed to punish you. And it's a punishment-based system that isolates you, it exposes you to more violence and to more trauma. You have obviously more suffering. But another thing it does is it strips you of your identity. You know how you had a first and last name and were referred to that your whole life? Now you're referred to a number. Oh, okay, so you're just going to depersonalize me? I can't go by my name anymore? Okay, I just want to be a number. Now I'm institutionalized. Now I have to deal with the mundane routine for as long as my sentence lasts. Now I am isolated from my financial resources, my emotional and mental resources, and my familial resources. My family does the time with me. I don't do it by myself. Even though they're not in the cell with me, in their minds, they're doing that time with me too. How do you think that affects the community in a negative way? Well, you fractured the stability of the family structure because we've isolated and are punishing somebody. And why are we punishing them? Well, spoiler warning, we're trying to punish them to deter their behavior, aren't we? We punish somebody so badly that behave like, oh man, that was so bad. I can't experience that again. It works for some people, yes, but it's not an effective way of designing an entire correctional system. It's supposed to be restorative or rehabilitative, but it largely isn't for a lot of people. For some, great, and I'm so happy when people can find their way out and still make it. For the most part, that's not really how it's designed. If they did design it that way, if it actually did work, imagine if punishment-based systems actually changed behavior, we would have the safest country in the world. We incarcerate more people than anybody. So if you think logically, oh, what's the motto, what's the mission statement of every correctional system? To rehabilitate, to restore, to reintegrate, whatever buzzwords they want to say. That's not what they're doing. That's not effective. It doesn't work. Like, look at the recidivism rates. And when you bring that data up, it makes people kind of upset because you're kind of thinking, well, what other systems do we have? We don't have anything else. We got to do something else, because this recidivism rate and the amount of money we're pouring into the correctional system feels like it's being thrown into a furnace. And the only thing people want to listen to is being tough on crime. That means more bars, more walls, expanding these systems. And if you expand them because they're overcrowded, you're just going to fill them up. And how do we fill them up? And the cycle continues. Anyway. But punishment-based consequences don't deter behavior, not effectively. And this correctional system has been around for hundreds of years. And if anybody knows the history of policing in America, if you go way, way back, this kind of has its genesis in rounding up slaves who have escaped the plantation. That's essentially the program of law enforcement that they based their systems off of, the English, on how they developed their policing system was kind of incorporated into us over time, but we got some kind of ugly roots in the correctional system. And I'm not saying it's a direct cause, but there is some ghosts that still seem to haunt those yards. But anyhow, the rehabilitation system that these correctional systems have in place that I've been witness to fall pretty well short of their design goal of reintegration. So imagine a scenario in your head where I get caught for, let's say, distributing marijuana in my community, and I get, and it's my second or third charge. And so the judge is going to throw the book at me. Now I get 3 years instead of 6 months probation. So I do my time, and I do it with good behavior, no write-ups, no, I didn't act out or anything. I was as quiet as a mouse. I got out, I did 80%. So out of my 3 years, I get out in 2 years and 5 months or something, right? So now if you think through in your head, play that movie out. Oh, okay, so I do my time, I get back into my car or take the bus back into my community. And then as soon as I get home to my community, the community is there waiting. Oh, come on in. You did it, good job. You served your time, you did your 3 years. Welcome back. We're excited to have you. Okay, we've missed you. That's what happens, right? Right? Isn't that? No, that's not what happens. Absolutely not. In fact, quite the opposite happens. You know why that happens? And that's kind of my little teaser at the bottom. We don't welcome them with open arms back into the community after they serve their time. They're supposed to be square with the house, right? Square? No. Interscene stigma and substance use disorders. Now, this is kind of where it takes the turn, right? People with problematic substance use disorders are considered, quote, the lowest of the low. And I say, quote, the lowest of the low. I mean to sound like I'm talking down. That's just what the literature is showing us. And at a neurological level, I'd be more specific. Some really interesting studies happened where they were, I won't go into the details, I'll talk for too long, but here are the bullet points. The strongest triggered reaction of disgust at the neurological level with viewing images of people with substance use disorders. Think about that for a second. You can't, the disgust, when you trigger disgust in a human, regardless of culture or location, it's like universal. A human reaction of disgust is universal culturally, okay? And to get the strongest reaction is from a visual cue of somebody who has a substance use disorder. Spare a thought for that. And it continues. It also didn't even activate the regions of the brain that normally were activated when other people see humans. What? I mean, think about that. They're getting the strongest level of disgust as they're seeing somebody with like a needle in their arm. I mean, think of the images they're using in substance use disorder, right? Probably somebody experiencing homelessness, somebody dirty with a needle in their arm. Think of all the images, right? And that's what they're using. That triggers the strongest reaction of disgust, and it doesn't even activate areas of the brain that you would see somebody as a human being. That is, to me, I mean, I got smacked across the face when I read that, and I started to understand it and think through, like, man, this is going to go a little deeper than I thought. But on top of all that, there's also this moral failing issue. People in the community, they see other people with struggling with addiction as more dangerous, more violent, untrustworthy. Why can't they just stop? God, they're ruining the community. They're stealing my car. They're trying to sell drugs to my kids. They're a menace to our society, right? But that's what everyone's saying, that it's some moral failing issue. Another researcher, a social scientist, surveyed people. 73% surveyed in a study were unwilling to even socialize with a person experiencing problematic substance use. So don't want to socialize with them, don't view them as human, and they trigger a very strong reaction of disgust. Stigma also, what that ties into is it relates to the dehumanization of this group of people. They're denied, they're an out group. Like when you have another group, an out group, we don't even, we deny out group human characteristics that we extend to other groups, like the capacity to feel or to make decisions. The stigma revolving around problematic substance use is that community are zombies because they're high and they don't feel, and they're so addicted, they don't have any autonomy. They can't make their own decisions. They're not independent thinkers anymore. But do you see all these human characteristics that they're losing through stigma? How devastating it could be to the community to have these not just these research and literature research papers. I'm sorry, these research papers coming out, but also like how prolific this kind of stigma is just based off of what we're seeing in the research. It's like, man, this othering, right? This othering contributes to community rejection. That's why remember when I was doing that facetious thing, hey, welcome back, you served your 3 years, welcome back to the community. We as a community do a really, really bad job of welcoming people back from the correctional departments. And you know, the rehabilitation in Nebraska, and I keep talking about it because that's the only thing I have experience with, the rehabilitation is $25 in a bus pass when you leave. Anywhere you want to go, they'll pay for the bus pass, but you get 25 bucks in a bus pass. Did they go through any formalized programming? Yeah, there are some of them, but does everyone have access to it? Are there a lot of people there to provide those services? Did they receive any treatments while they were in? Did they learn any skills? Have they adapted to their new environment? Do they have anybody on the other side in the community to help bridge them, help them find a home, help them get services, help them get a steady job, help with transportation? No, they don't. So when people get into the community and find themselves in a precarious situation without resources, suddenly they're reoffending, and now they're back into that same system. And everyone's like, oh, you just got out. How could you reoffend and go back in? If I have, and I've talked to hundreds of my clients in corrections, like, I have kids, I have rent, I don't have the money, nobody will hire me, I need fast cash or I lose my house. So I'm going to go back to a skill that I know how to do, which is potentially turn drugs or whatever the case. But then them reoffending and going back in reattaches that stigma, and the problem exacerbates itself over time. So here are the specific negative consequences. If I wasn't specific enough, access to certain jobs, that's changed. Have you ever been convicted of ... Do you know how many people just stop right there and just throw the application out? Or just, you know what, not even worth it. Or I can get everybody loving me. They like my experience. They want me to join their team. I'm very excited. They think I could be really, really successful in this job. And then they do the background check, and that all goes away. No conversation, nothing. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a felony. We can't. It's a policy. It's a policy. We can't have anybody with a felony on here because we're defining you by your worst mistake. Because that's how we as a society deal with people who have been involved in corrections. A lot of the time, I'm being general for a reason. Safe and affordable housing, you can lose housing vouchers, you can lose your SNAP benefits, your food stamps, you can lose access to those things, denied rental applications, a business loan. Good luck trying to get a business loan. Are you serious? A business loan? Oh, come on, no. Also, if you have a charge, it's almost like you develop this thin, sticky layer across all of your body where another charge is just so easy to stick to you. So every police interaction is higher stakes. Oh, sorry, I was going too over the speed limit. Thanks for the warning. That doesn't exist if I've been in the system and I'm on paper. I have a different interaction, especially if I have a different or a darker pigment in my skin tone. My interaction might be a little more nerve-wracking, especially if I'm on paper and I've been in the system before. I would say that people in the substance use community are treated as second-class citizens, but from the research that we've gone through, and if you haven't kind of clued into now, they're kind of treated as third-class citizens. If you really boil it down to it, if they're the bottom of the bottom, let's not mince words. They're treated as third-class citizens, isolated, pushed aside by society and the community. We as a community do a horrendous job of welcoming people back from the correctional departments. People have lack of access to healthcare, mental health, physical health, addiction services, not even an exhaustive list, but let's put the two together. How do we start the process of change then? And this is kind of my thought I'm posing to all of us. How do we as a community of substance use and addiction providers start to draw out the venom, stigma injected into the body of problematic substance use community? What do we need to do? And I was thinking through, or how do I really lead this off? And Rumi has this incredibly on point very perfectly phrased, short. Heart is sea, language is shore. Whatever sea includes will hit the shore by Rumi. Fantastic. And if I find a way to shoehorn Calvin and Hobbes into anything, I'm going to do it. And this is us putting our thinking caps on, using this quote from Rumi as kind of a springboard. So if heart is seed and language is shore, let's see how that kind of plays out. The first and easiest thing we can do to reduce how venomous stigma can be in our community that we work in, we can start with language. And let's kick it off by talking about Dr. George F. Koob. Koob is the director of the NIAAA, and he said at a conference last year that I attended, and I wrote this quote down, quote, "We can help alleviate stigma associated with alcohol-related conditions by consistently using non-pejorative, non-stigmatizing language to describe the community. For instance, commonly used stigmatized language, you guys probably know this already, include alcoholic, alcohol abuse. We should be using alcohol use disorder or problematic alcohol use instead of alcohol abuse, alcohol dependence, alcoholism. It puts the onus on the user themselves. So when we refer to them as alcohol dependence or alcohol abuse, if I had a feeding disorder and I was a binge eater, would I be a food abuser? Is that what I would be referred to as? Doesn't that seem kind of overly harsh to call somebody a food abuser? So why would we use that same language in our community if we know it contributes to bad help-seeking data? If people are less likely to get mental health resources because of the stigma attached to it, we as a community have to do our best to remove the venom, or at least lower the intensity of it, so more and more people can come and see us for services. We need to be using first-person language, person with an alcohol use disorder rather than an alcoholic, because these people are person. They are people first, aren't they? Wasn't one of those old slides talking about how dehumanizing it was and othering it was? Well, we have to change that by putting person first. It's at least a start, right? This is important to reduce the barriers for help seeking because 90% of people with substance use disorders do not receive treatment. And the ones who do receive treatment, most of that isn't evidence-based. So, man, we have an uphill battle. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper. I'm sure people are familiar with Dr. Nora Volkow. She was also she's also a director like Dr. Koob, and they both kind of, with Dr. Gordon, created this incredible article. I really suggest everyone go and read this. Says here the words we use to describe mental illness and substance use disorders, addiction to alcohol and other legal and illegal drugs, can impact the likelihood that people will seek help and the quality of the help they receive. Research indicates that stigma, negative attitudes towards people on distinguishing characteristics contribute in multiple ways to poorer health outcomes. Consequently, it has been identified as a critical focus for research and interventions. Now, this is from two people who are the directors of national institutions. Well, that seems like they would have a lot of influence, right? Wonder what happened. Let's find out. Well, look at that. Names of addiction-related federal agencies are changing. Interesting. In the House and Senate, versions of the Health and Human Services Funding Bill Appropriations Committee are posing name changes for 3 federal agencies focused on substance use in order to reduce stigma. And I have highlighted here the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, like SAMHSA, and NIAAA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. They're changing them to, respectively, the Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration, the National Institute of Drugs and Addiction, the National Institute of Alcohol Effects and Alcohol-Related Disorders. And this is going to start, and again, I have this highlighted. This is changing. So hopefully, relatively soon, we're starting to see major federal institutions kind of clue in and think, oh man, we really need to reduce or change our language so that we can start lowering the addiction and kind of move this along. So I'm good on time. I'm doing all right. Okay. So what else beyond language? It's not just language that we can use, right? But how else do we further integrate this into our practices? Well, if you think through when you've provided your services to people who are struggling with problematic substance use, how did they walk in the door? If you think through, like, what narrative do they tell themselves about themselves, and what have other people told them? Probably majority of their problematic use. Probably they've been told, hey, you really shouldn't be using anymore. Wow, are you kind of a, you're kind of not a good person. You really should stop using, and all these judgments that kind of get filled with it. And if you jump on that judgment train, isn't it easy for them to go defensive and not immediately not want to engage with you, because they'll just count you as one of the other 1,000 people that have told them the same exact thing they've been hearing their entire time, but still can't figure out a way to stop? So if you provide a safe spot and you right out of the gate saying, listen, whatever you say, it's irrelevant. It's like, that's not irrelevant. I'm saying it's without judgment. Whatever you tell me, whatever story, however bad you think it is, I'm here with you now, and you will not be judged in this place. This is a place that is confidential between you and I want to get to know you so I can be helpful to you, however that looks. And we can figure that out as a team together. What is it? What services do you need? How can I be helpful to you? I don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste mine. So how can I help you while you're here, right? If you can remove that judgment, provide that safe spot, it's at least a starting point. Also, there's a huge difference between empathy and sympathy. I think of sympathy, and I use this as a visualization to describe it to my clients. But when I think of empathy versus sympathy, I think of somebody at the bottom of a well and me walking up to the top of that well, looking down and seeing a person at the bottom of the well yelling up at me for help. So if I'm looking down and talking to them and, oh my goodness, that's terrible. I'm so sorry you're down there. To me, that's sympathy. Sympathy in the sense that, oh, I feel sorry for you. Pity for you. Is that helpful? Maybe, maybe not. Some people want that, some people don't. Empathy, I think, is the real magic, where I end up tying some tree branches together or getting a ladder or a rope, and I climb down into the well with them. And as I stand next to them, saying, hey, I got your back. I'm here with you. That's empathy to me. Show I got some skin in the game, and I'm with you as a team to get through this together as a unit, right? That's where I think the empathy versus sympathy is differentiated. I encourage you to go empathetic, not sympathy. I mean, sympathy, sure, but empathy, I feel, is the real magic. And I remind my patients, quote, you're the captain of the ship. You are, and I am just the first mate in the compass. But when you empower a client who hasn't had access to power or influence in probably decades because of either their addiction, their familial system, society, stigma, you name it, when you empower them and give them that agency, you'll be shocked to see how excited they are having control for once. You give them that control in a safe, non-judgmental zone and say, hey, I'm with you too. What do you need? How can I help you? And that combination, you can really get at somebody's core, I guess. I don't know a better way to say that, but to me, that helps facilitate real talk where I could get to know somebody and actually understand where they're coming from. And the visualization I use is with my clients, if your addiction is kind of like a garden weed, and if it continues to grow and your only goal is to just trim the weed every day so that you don't notice it, but the roots of the weed are never really addressed, that weed is going to continue to grow until forever, right? I'm in the business of doing the hard work of getting on my hands and knees with you and pulling up that weed from the roots, so we don't have to keep going back and trimming it. Because yes, it's effective to trim it, but it keeps growing back. So how often do you want to go back and keep trimming? Why not do the hard work once, where we pull that from the roots up and we can move together as a unit? And yes, it'll be hard. And yes, it will take time. And no, there is no silver bullet. But that's if you can bring them alongside you and show them the path, I think there's an opportunity there. And I feel like these circumstances really help move the needle clinically, at least in my experience. Now, moving on. I also think we can provide psychoeducation about the healing processes of addiction, retraining their dopaminergic system. If you're considering blowing out your dopaminergic system and flooding it with a bunch of dopamine with IV use of heroin or smoking methamphetamines or alcohol, or I mean, any real addiction, I mean, you can get a big old spike of dopamine from a lot of things, but if you constantly blow it out where your dopaminergic system can't really recover, I think of it like if my neurotransmitter of dopamine is too many keys, and I only have so many locks as far as my dopamine receptors, all those keys are going to try to fit into that same lock, and it's going to break it over time. So when people are done with their addictions, they're feeling this wave of depression, and it's like, yeah, that makes sense. So when you provide some context to somebody who might not otherwise know, it gives them a little confidence that they're, number one, not alone. They're with somebody who's an experienced provider, and someone's got my back. Oh, they're teaching me things. Okay, if I understand why I'm feeling so emotional or so blue, or I can't get out of bed, or I have an idea because my dopaminergic system was fried, and it's going to take time to heal. And it might not heal all the way, but you need at least a calendar year of sobriety for the healing process really to start. If you teach them that, then you can help get that light at the end of their tunnel, when sometimes at the end of the tunnel there is no light. And that's kind of a scary notion when you think about it. So I also spend time customizing these skills to integrate them into their lives specifically. Ask them to not reenact, but at least give out the details about how a bad conversation spiked their cravings or something. Okay, let's reenact that conversation, but let's use the skills that we taught you instead, and let's replay that scenario and see if we get the same effect. But if you can customize these skills and drop it directly into their life experience, it helps contextualize what you're doing. This is, oh, you remember those skills we taught you? This is why we're using them, because, oh, right here, we can use them here. And remember how that bad interaction went? It would be less bad if you approach it from this direction, don't you think? And then the discussion's flowing, and now you have them bought into the process. And that's where things can really take off for the positive. Okay, still doing good on time. Moving on. So I think we need to start changing hearts and minds organically. And that's kind of I'm from California, I'm kind of a hippie anyway, but if you think about it, I'm really trying to win over people from a grassroots approach. And that's like doing it's slow and deliberate. It's not quick, it's not fast or flashy. There's no marketing team. This isn't social media. This is representing the field well, changing the perceptions of what help looks like, not like in the media. If you think of like mental health help in the media, you think of like The Sopranos, this guy's weird relationship with his therapist, or some Freudian, I'm on the couch facing the other way, old school, Fifth Avenue, New York type of, no, at least that's not for me. That exists. I don't mean to throw stones at that side of the field. That's great. It's not for me, and at least not what my work looks like as far as problematic substance use goes anyhow. But we have an opportunity to positively impact somebody's experience with mental health. And that's important. Seriously, if you think about it, I think of it as like a little miniature restaurant. If you have an incredible experience in my little mini restaurant, my little clinic or whatever I have, you're going to talk about it, especially if it involves your mental health, or maybe you won't. But if you can talk about the improvements of your mental health, even to your family, it's like, oh, I don't want to go to a therapist. I don't want them poking around in my head. And then someone's like, no, like, I actually really was struggling. I was drinking too much for a few years and I got real sick and was kind of in a bad way. And as I was working with my therapist, I learned a bunch of different skills and kind of retrained my mind to think about things in a different way. We have an opportunity to impact somebody like substantially, and we can make that spread organically by providing excellent services and really bringing it, like showing up to those sessions prepared, ready to work, having ideas, offering a menu of options for your client to choose from that are clinically appropriate. And I put quotes over winning, like winning over. Of course, speaking up when we overhear pejorative, stigmatizing language, that's just being a good defender of humanity, I think, personally. Winning over the public is through this grassroots movement. I think, like, if we can impact a person and they impact their family who have now a different perspective on mental health treatment and services, hopefully over time, getting services will be as simple as a routine doctor visit. Think of how casual we are with, like, oh yeah, I bumped my knee, I bonked it, or I messed my knee up or my elbow up in basketball. You go to the doctor's office, nobody even blinks an eye. But if you go and get help, hey, I'm feeling really depressed. I'm not connecting with my family, and I'm in the dumps, or I'm so anxious. I can't speak in public, and everyone's thinking, oh man, you're so weak. Oh, you're so incapable, or whatever the stigma continually perpetuates. But this is what I think is a tip of the spear in trying to pierce that stigma balloon, right? And some of the quotes that I've wholesale ripped from other people, and not that I'm not crediting them, this is just a generality from sports, like to get something you never had, you have to do something you've never done. So if you want to get to a life where alcohol or substances aren't calling the shots anymore, then we got to do something different, don't we? A complex problem requires a complex solution. So coming into therapy isn't the magic bullet, it's the work you do in the therapy. And when you set that tone right, you get those expectations different. And now you're off to the races of going in a direction clinically by having your clients live congruently with their value system. I have never, ever in my life, ever had a client tell me their value system was to be continually using problematic substances until they die. I've never had somebody have a core value that is, I'd love to continually use my substances to a problematic level. Not once has anybody ever said that to me. So we know they also don't want to be using or continually drinking. If we can get them on our level and get them to buy into the process, provide that safe opportunity, and try to draw the venom out of the wound of stigma, we can help try to inspire that change and really move the needle on somebody who's struggling with this problematic substance use. So, linking arms, talk about community a lot, right? We're part of this community, like all of us, we are all part of this community. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but yeah, come on, I got to find a way to pump that into there too, just because I feel like a child and I want you to see the movies I like. Anyway, strength in numbers and influence. If we can bring all of our thoughts and heads together, share our resources, like these didactics, these is a perfect example of how to do that. I envision adding strength and reinforcement, like a dynamic community support net. So I think of it like I think of our work as this big circus net underneath society, okay? And when people go through life in such a way, or they catch a series of bad luck, or there's infinite ways that people find themselves in our services, they kind of fall into this big circus net catch-all. And I think the more of us that bring our thoughts and our experiences and our ideas together, what I feel like it does is it just strengthens the weight the net can carry if we're underneath catching people who fall through the cracks. To me, it's like when we as a substance use providing community come together, it's like running steel cables through all those ropes so that they don't break and nobody falls through all the way. The reason I say that is, here's my information. That's my email address, both email addresses. You get me coming and going. However you want to interact with me or share ideas or communicate, like I'm very much part of this community. I fully intend on staying in Oklahoma the rest of my career and really trying to add a verse to the song of healing or whatever, hippie thing I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to reach out, professionally network. And I think when we lock arms like this, then we can really cook and we can influence more and more people. And then we can start spreading the ideas that our work doesn't have to be with somebody who is a zombie, who doesn't have agency, who isn't human, who is just pure disgust. We could start decoupling that from people's minds and then hopefully going in a direction that isn't where it's headed now, I guess. Anyway, so let's work together. Don't be a stranger. I saved a little time, well, not really 5 minutes, but anyway, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you for your time and your attention and the work you do. I hope to hear from people and that we can collaborate and communicate in the future. I'm excited. I'm beyond excited, actually. I'm thrilled to be here and to be involved in this community. And I am grateful for the opportunity to speak to you all today. Huge honor. Very grateful, very excited, and I can't wait to continue working with everybody. That's all I have.
Thanks, Dr. Little. Any comments or questions for Dr. Little from the group?
I just want to say thank you. You're preaching to the choir.
I figured so. Yeah, this is a captive audience. Absolutely.
I did a similar program with this with the chemical dependency seminar on the recidivism of people going back to prison from these kinds of charges and what happens to them when they get out.
What happens to them is pretty ugly. What
Yeah.
happens? Yeah, and the reason I know that is because I had an opportunity to provide clinical services at Nebraska State Penitentiary and follow them through probation at the probation office downtown. So I had this really cool arc of development of somebody who got caught, got incarcerated, served their time, got out on probation, and we're working with them in that context. And it's brutal. And it's also, I don't think a lot of people know how expensive it is to be on probation. They have to pay their own way, and they have to pay fees, and they have to pay for their own drug testing. And it is very expensive to be on probation.
Person with no insurance and no job.
Correct. And then they're like, oh,
No
we
way
need
to
you
get a place to live, because if you have a felony on your record, you can't find a place to live.
see?
Those people.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So I hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, everybody. Any other questions? My email is out there. I'm an easy guy to get a hold of. And Dr. Fink, if anybody has contact or with contact with Dr. Fink, she can get a hold of me pretty easy too. So.
Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for your attention today. Just one last time, the number to text the code to the phone number is area code 405-562-5828. And the code for today is 12457. And thank you all. Enjoy your long weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Take care.